Morning, all.
Hey. Assembling people. And then we'll get going.
Joe Steven posted he will be a few minutes late to the meeting.
Okay. Thanks. We have Rob. All right, so we have I guess we need one more for quorum, if my arithmetic is correct. All right. I think we can get started. Because I don't want to waste any time, waste anyone's time. All right. First topic. First, a couple of announcements. First announcement is that we had a Bright Talk presentation yesterday. There are a bunch of links where you can access the abstract and the presentation itself. I don't want to review that in detail, but I did want to record the questions we received. And so they're at 1E in the announcements. And it was an interesting list of questions. We had 100 and something people on. We'll probably get 500 views or something in a week, or maybe a few more. That's typically how the Network Storage Foundation STIA Bright Talks have been running for this topic. And so there were quite a lot of questions, and they were good ones, and a number, most of the questions, or half the questions, related to how people want to understand how OPI relates to other things going on in the industry. So we will have to put some effort into that to get a better handle on it. Sorry, it's it's a little early for me. And the second big announcement is that HP is officially a general member of OPI now. So they signed all the paperwork, and Sridhar let me know last night, early his morning, that they're now official. We thought they might be official for yesterday so we could put them on the slide, but they're now official. Okay. So let's okay, for our agenda, I want to conclude on the lab so we can put it in front of the board at the February 13th meeting, and start setting up the lab. And the important part of the lab is the CIC automated regression tests, which begs the question of, are we going to have regression tests? But let's assume that we'll have enough to get started, because again, there's lead times on equipment, and it'll take a while for everything to get set up and used. So we want to start with that aspect of the lab. Mirsa, where have we ended up on the lab? And Venkat, welcome back. You can comment.
Yes, so there are some feedback.
Yeah. We have a question from Ravi first. Yeah, go ahead, Ravi.
Hey, Joseph. Very good morning. And this is Ravi here, and I represent UNV Corp. Venkat had introduced us to OPI a while back. We are keen to see if we could be the partner to set up the lab as a service. And if that is allowed, we would be happy to submit our proposal as well.
Yeah, I believe it is. So the Linux, so if we look at C, 1C in the agenda and notes, this is a section from Sridhar from the Linux Foundation on the process and procedure. So we would welcome anyone who can host the lab and run the lab for us. We have pull requests that outline the type of equipment we want and the general operating rules of the lab. So you could review those offline with Venkat and I know I'll butcher the name, Mircea. So anyway,
Will do, Joseph.
Yeah, so you guys can review that in detail and look at the pull request, provide feedback, and work that way. Okay, so
thank you.
On the lab, so Mircea, you were starting.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not able to share this morning, but from the notes from last time, there was a need for a diagram for the lab and also to do a reduced BOM for phase 1. So I did both, and they are there in the PR. And to put some more details around purchasing criteria. So all these 3 feedbacks are done. Now, I did not, unfortunately, and I think this is on me, got the feedback from the use case work group. And there are a bunch of other items which are not necessarily on me, but this is my update.
Right. No, that's perfect. So what I need everyone to do is read those, provide comments, because I don't want to review in detail here. What I want to do is vote on that next week to say that's good enough for us to get approval from the board to go do the lab, start in getting equipment, getting it installed, get the CI/CD. So I think we've done enough talking about this, and we should now execute on the lab. Does anyone disagree? Venkat.
Yeah, so thank you. Sorry, I was away for a few weeks, and thanks, Mircea, for helping out during that time. So what I propose, Joe, is that, I agree we have done enough discussions. I think we surfaced most of the issues. I think we need to get to action. So the best way it can happen is some of us to have a regular meeting, right, offline, and of course some of that output or whatever gets discussed need to come back into the chat so that everyone is aware. But if we best way is really for a few of us who are interested in this topic to meet multiple times a week in the short term, because to make sure that we look at each of these vendors and select one, as well as finalize on the procedure. So I can take a lead and start setting up those meetings and inform everyone.
Okay, and so you're going to take the lead for talking to the vendors and closing out on the lab.
Yeah, so again, when I say I will set up a meeting, invite multiple people. I don't want it to be just me talking to them, and then I'm sure others who have interest in the area will join, is the hope.
Okay, so Mark, so I have the list here.
Yeah,
of the people
I'll take it from here. Yeah.
need to be on that
Yep.
team and go talk to the vendors, get the best deal that we can, the best overall solution to the requirements we have. And the CI/CD auto testing is the important one. All right, so you're going to lead it, and we're going to put so again, we need this set of people and anyone else who wants to participate in that. And I want to put it in front of the board. So VinCat, that's going to be on Monday. It's the second Monday. I'll tell you the date in a second. As soon as I pop a calendar up. Yeah, the 13th. So Monday the 13th at 6 a.m. Pacific. So I want to invite you, and we need a summary to put in front of the board saying this is our plan. This is where we are on the vendor selection, and we want approval to use the allocated budget to execute. All right, we have some.
And the meeting, yeah, that makes sense. And if I set up any meetings, I will invite these specific names mentioned here, but even the meeting detail will be posted so that in case somebody else wants to join in also. So
and if you want to be part of this, send a chat to VinCat. You can send a chat to VinCat either in Slack or in this meeting. Boris, you're next.
Just want to emphasize how important it is to have a deadlines. We need to establish when those meetings are over, because we've been talking about the lab for quite a while, and I think we need to really move forward fast. We need to ship servers with DPUs and start working. So I would like TSC to define timelines. When we finish the conversation, propose to board, when we start shipping servers with DPUs and everything. I think that talking is great, but without having an actual deadlines and timelines, it will be very difficult for us to move forward.
So the proposal has to go in front of the board on Monday, February 13th at 6 a.m. That's the first deadline. And then at that point, we need to say when we will close on the lab as a service provider selection. So we need a date.
Yeah, I believe we need to have all dates. When we finish when we present to board, when we finish the conversation, when we close the deal, when we start shipping, when we have the lab up and running. I think we need to set goals. If we are late for these goals, that's fine. Understandable, but if we're not having any goals that we can actually track and achieve, we'll be spending another year without a lab. Yeah,
So again, the first goal, as I said already, is Monday the 13th of February at the board meeting. I want the plan proposed to get approval from the board, so the board can say, yes, this makes sense to us. We agree. You can spend the money. And at that point, then we need an execution schedule, because we should know enough about the lab choices, VinCat, to give them to have a recommendation for the lab. Does that make sense, VinCat?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we will try to present the 3 dates, which is when the the provider selection date, when we will ship, when the lab will be in production, or at least the proposed dates. I think these 3 need to be presented on Monday or the second Monday of February. That we have one deadline, and on that deadline date, we will have to have the dates for all the other 3. Execution plan at least, right? So, and that execution plan has to influence our vendor selection, right? Because the main reason we started looking at others to begin with, at least from my understanding, is that not all vendors can move at the pace that we want it to be. Yeah.
Right. KYS, you're next.
Hi, this is my first attendance of this meeting. I'm KY Srinivasan from Microsoft. So Joe, I just wanted to know if the link to the requirements document for the kind of hardware you wanted and the kinds of the tests you want to run, is that available in this document, or is there a separate place where the link is?
I think Boris, that's what you just posted in the, so that's the bomb. There's also the general requirements, if somebody could post that in the chat, and they're available in the previous meetings minutes. I just didn't copy them forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you look in the previous meeting minutes, and then Boris posted the bomb pull request, and we can post the, so while we're moving on, Boris, if you wouldn't mind posting the, you know, the general lab procedural requirements. Okay, Paul.
You bet. So my question was procedural. So do we have approval to go start talking to vendors and get quotes and that sort of thing with the,
That's on us.
say
Yeah,
that?
that's on us. We can start talking to vendors. We
Good.
can't.
Okay. I didn't know if we wanted to wait until after the board meeting to get
No.
the overall thing approved before we did that, or
No.
if we just start.
No, because some of the details and the will likely be contingent on what the vendors tell us.
Got it.
We may have to make an adjustment based on what they tell us. So those meetings need to start happening next week. We need, and again, you know, Jan, you can fill in a VinCat on what we talked to UNHIOL when we were Diamond Bluff, if you don't mind, Jan.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. There is a request that I know. We had a recording of a meeting with UNH, which I think would be useful to review for the new members. Unfortunately, the access is I think it's still with Red Hat. Like I cannot access it, cannot share it. So maybe we can reach out and make sure that they share it back to the community.
To talk to Stephen, and if he can't do it, let me know. Then talk to Chris, or have Stephen talk to Chris, or I'll talk to Chris if it's on a Red Hat server and we just need it copied.
We can upload it to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, into our private repository.
Yeah.
That one
right now access is a problem. Yeah, but Mark and I were already trying to do that. So
yeah, and that one we probably can't post publicly to the YouTube channel, but we can certainly post it in you know, a less easily searchable, visible area, or just, you know, share it directly, or just provide specific access. All right, Dan.
So I want to know the part numbers for the DPUs. If the vendors can actually provide the part number, not just a model.
Reach out to the TSC representative from each of the vendors directly, you and VinCat, and just ask them. I mean, just be proactive. Just ask them directly. And if they don't, if they don't answer you, let me know, and you know, I'll see if I can help.
Yeah, and it will be good actually to make a page on OPI and say this is the officially supported hardware by OPI, right? I think this should be public information.
Yeah, that would be great. If you proposing the, you know, the format and layout of that page and the contents it should have would be fantastic. So bring that bring that in. That's a great idea. Okay, so any other thoughts or comments on lab activity? So again, as I've been saying all of January, our deadline is the February board meeting to get the proposal in front of the board for approval so we can spend the money. And again, our initial focus should be on the CI/CD automated tests against a set of DPUs. And again, we can start small in the tests and build up from there. But we have to start somewhere, to Boris's point. All right. Any final comments or thoughts? So I assume the hand that's still raised and is dropping in a minute. Okay. All right. So we have a plan to get the lab stuff finished and going. Again, this is the input from Sridhar. If you don't understand what's in C, you can send Sridhar a email or contact him in Slack, and we can get that refined, or post a question on the mailing list, and we can, you know, answer any questions and get that refined. I thought this list was pretty clear, so shouldn't be a problem. Okay, next, code maintainers. So Kyle has left. How do we replace? We really need another code maintainer. There are requirements for the code maintainer that we talked about last time. All right, do we have any volunteers, or do we have anyone who has been volunteered to be a code maintainer who can meet the requirements? Boris.
There is nobody who is currently compliant with the requirement of being maintainer. Nobody is contributing except for me and Steven. So we cannot just volunteer people. Somebody needs to come and show he's active, doing code reviews, doing active contributions according to all the outlines. So we cannot just vote on a maintainer.
Fair enough. That's fair. All right. So for the TSC members and our general members, how do we make that happen from additional member companies, right? Because, you know, we have, so our maintainers right now are Boris, Mark, and I believe Steven. Who else? Do we have anyone else? Sorry, it jumped out of my head.
No.
Okay. So we have 2 from Dell and 1 from Red Hat. So we need someone from another company. So if you're a TSC, direct member, how do we get enough involvement from someone from one of your teams or one of you guys to become another maintainer? And, you know, if you're shy, you don't have to speak up on the phone, but that's required. Dan.
If we do a testing repository and so on, I can volunteer to help there, but if it's code, probably not. So let's say my background is mostly Python automation and so on. So I can help with reviews and things for a testing repository.
Okay, so that's excellent to know. If we started getting some, Python test code in that area for the things we've already defined, I think that would be excellent. You know, nice hobby, good to put on your resume, etc. Rob.
I am trying to find some, obviously Kyle has big shoes to fill. I'm trying to find, it's probably going to be a couple people to fill those shoes. And, per what Boris said, the intent is for having them to start contribute code first. And then we'll see who can bubble up to the top of the stack in terms of who might be up to the bar for a maintainer, but it just so folks know the plan.
Excellent. Stephen.
Yeah, just to Mircea's point, we do have test code today. There's test code in a number of repos, but the main CI test environment and the simulation environment is in the POC repo. So please, have a look at that. If you have questions about it, please feel free to ask.
Excellent. Rob?
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand. Let me drop it now.
Boris?
I have 2 comments. First of all, is we created repositories per vendor. So I think if vendor can take the responsibility for their repositories, we have one for NVIDIA. I see our endurers here on the call. We have one bridge for NVIDIA that is created. If they can take active leadership role, we can definitely put them as maintainers on the repository. We have created one for Marvell bridge. If they can take active role maintaining it, we can make them as a maintainer on those repositories. That's not a problem. So I think that's one way to grow maintainers from the companies to be specific on the repositories.
That's excellent.
The second point.
Yeah.
The second point is, while we have the POC repo, like Steven mentioned, I do believe we need to create a new repository for compliance testing in Python that we can actually have a single repository that is testing compliance specific things. So just a lot of testing. So I am really +1 Mercia for volunteering. We can have a discussion with Steven and others how this repository will look like. So I'm definitely seeing a lot of value in doing that.
All right, and that's any other comments on maintainers and contributing? All right, so that's a great segue into the vendor bridge code support. And then maintaining those vendor bridges. So if you guys are producing DPUs, we want, we obviously need bridge between the API definitions and some of the other components that have been defined and agreed upon so far to your DPU. And it seems reasonable that the ongoing support and maintenance ought to come from each of the DPU vendors. That it's not a huge job or very time consuming. So, yeah, go ahead, Boris, flesh out what you really require there, because, we started this discussion last time, but what I want is some commitment from the TSC and this group on how to operate. Go ahead, Boris.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. So I want to have a really honest discussion here. We created the bridges for NVIDIA Marvell. I know AMD Pensando is also working on the bridge privately before they can publish it. And we do feel that the responsibility for the maintaining bridges, releases, and everything should be on the maintainer companies. So for NVIDIA Bridge, Oren, I think NVIDIA should take responsibility for Marvell as well. My question is, why, if the companies feel that this is not the right direction, then we are really open to hear other proposals. Today, we created the bridges between OPI, APIs, and SDKs. We have one bridge for Docker for NVIDIA. We have one bridge for Marvell SDK. For Intel, we have SPDK because they don't require any special handling. So we have 3 bridges ready, and one is going to be published by AMD Pensando as well. So the question, if maintainer companies are not willing to take responsibility and moving it forward, I just question this entire direction. If people feel this is not the right approach, let's be vocal about it, really honest, and let's close this work stream and move on to something else. I just don't understand what is the difficulty or why people is not jumping on this. If they feel this is not the right approach, I would like to learn about it. That's it.
Rob, you're up.
I think Boris is asking great questions. Let me give you some tentative answers. At least the way we're looking at this, and I'm guessing how other vendors are looking at this, is this is a market that we are trying to make. It's a market that I think technically makes sense, but that doesn't always mean that it will fly. And I think as customer adoption increases, it'll be much easier to staff towards this. And so what I'd actually like to suggest is kind of a parallel effort, in addition to trying to build up these bridges, is trying to advocate for these bridges and make sure from the customer side that there's the pull. I mean, we can try to push all we want, but that doesn't necessarily mean this will stick to the wall. Thoughts, particularly from folks who are consuming these things?
So restate your proposal again.
I think the inherent concept of the bridges is a vendor push. And I think that there's enough of a skeleton there for customers to understand what we're doing. And I think what we need to do is actually turn it into a customer pull. And once that happens, it'll be much easier to staff towards.
So vendor push, customer pull. So, okay. So that bleeds over into kind of an overall OPI value proposition, which I think we'll have an interesting discussion on that at the next TSC meeting. So please show up for that one if you're on this call. I don't want to have that full discussion today because I haven't, and tell you what we're kind of thinking about, because I have a few more conversations to have before that. On how OPI, what OPI defines in the open source components and the APIs we define match to each DPU vendor, that seems like it ought to be an internal, basically DPU vendor plus, immediate API consumer collaboration, but really the vendor should maintain the hooks onto their DPUs through the bridges. Hooks being a very loose way to describe what the bridge does. And if that doesn't make sense, then what's a good alternative? And now, in terms of the overall effort and value proposition of OPI, that is a longer discussion, and I'm trying to clear up some of our previous efforts so that we only need the status form, so we can, spend the next meeting and probably the one after that discussing, and then the details of the plan. And I know I'm being vague there, and I apologize, Rob. Go ahead, Rob, and then Keith. Go, yeah, Rob, you still have your hand?
So, I'll lower my hand, my fault.
Yeah. Okay. But does that expansion make sense, Rob, of kind of what the request is? And again, if there's another way to structure it mechanically, again, this is about code that matches, SDKs and other vendor DPU things to what we have, right? That's what the bridge is.
May I suggest maybe a different tack here? And if this derails the meeting, it gets the cart in front of the horse, but we can take this offline. But what I'd love to see is some sort of hello world open source application that customers want to have work that exercises a bunch of APIs. And you can consider it kind of test code, but something that's also kind of motivational.
We have that, Rob, implemented inside Dell. We have the CSI drivers for Kubernetes for storage that are consuming our storage APIs. That's all open source and public.
But I'd like to make sure that other people agree with that, because as we both know, there's a lot of nuance in there.
Well, yeah, and so that's an example of something. There could be other examples. So we could have a set of these, each of which could provide value. And the question of the OPI value to the vendors, the middlemen, and the consumers, again, that I want that to be the focus for probably the next two TSC meetings. So there's a, it's sort of the existential discussion for OPI, if I say it in a cute way, but it's a deadly serious topic, right? Because if there's no value being provided by OPI, then what's the point of OPI? Now, all the people I've talked to so far believe there is immediate value and there is North Star long-term value, and we just have to define the map from the immediate value, get that released, but that'll be a fairly involved discussion, which again I'm not quite ready to launch into today. In any case, if there's any value anywhere for this, we're going to have here's how, here's OPI on each DPU, and then there could be more stuff. So again, there can be IPDK on top of that DPU as well. There could be a flexible processing chain on the DPU. There could be matching to, here's how DPU plays in Kubernetes infrastructure. Here's the components you need. Here's how the use case works. I mean, I could do 4 or 5 of those. Okay, so we probably can't conclude this one today, but we need to think hard about that aspect and what it means. And I agree it's partly tied to the values, to whether we care, but assuming we care, we need some kind of bridge with vendors supporting it. Does that make sense to everyone? Well,
Joe.
Keith and KYS go, and then I'll take general feedback.
So you can call me
Joe.
KY.
This is Keith. I have been raised my hand for a while.
Yeah, Keith. I was saying Keith and then KYS. So Keith, go ahead first.
Yes. So my question is, has the use cases, and we have a team dedicated to doing use cases, share the important use cases with customers, and what's their feedback?
So they have, and we discussed it at the last 2 TSC meetings.
Okay.
And some of the implications of that. So a lot has gone over that. We can revisit that, and obviously whatever we say should support the use cases. I mean, whatever we decide on, say is the wrong word, decide on should support the use cases for sure. But
yeah, so I guess my input is that Rob, does that, if there's data that says, oh, customers really gung-ho on this particular use case, would that contribute to the pool that you're looking for?
And I guess at the risk of repeating myself, it's important when I say few words, it's important to listen to all of them. I said code.
Okay.
Right. And everybody can sit there and talk about a use case at a high level and say, yeah, I guess that's kind of close. But if it's code, that makes it very concrete and pushes a whole bunch of decisions to the forefront. So
that's right.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah, and I agree with Rob's statement. It's the code we're talking about, and again, and this is what Boris was emphasizing earlier as well. All right, KYS.
Yeah, thank you. So, in fact, I too had a similar question in terms of who did we consider as customers. Now, as Microsoft, I think we're going to use a lot of this, and we are deploying today in our own fleet custom hardware that kind of falls in the same bucket as some kind of an offload card, DPU card, and so on. And so, is it the goal of this project to really meet where the customers are? Obviously, every one of us is doing it differently, like what Amazon would do is different from what Microsoft does. But is it the plan to really, both on the edge and the cloud, to look at a standard way of provisioning and using the functionality that is currently available in a Bluefield card or Intel's, Smart NIC card and so on. So who is the customer here? I looked at the list here and I didn't really see either cloud providers or I see VMware there. Maybe that's the customer that's being talked about here. But we have edge properties that we want to leverage.
Yeah, Alad, is Alad still on, or did he have to drop? I thought he was on earlier.
Looks like he dropped.
Yeah, he had to drop. So we have, okay. So KYS, we have some collateral produced by the use case group, which is led by Alad from NVIDIA. And he has information on who he talked to, what they're interested in, what some of their constraints are. We have direct feedback from some, final end users, and the middlemen who aren't producing DPUs but produce solutions and stacks and integrations with hardware, like Dell, F5, Red Hat, HPE will be one of those, and others. So we have information from those kinds of companies as well. And so again, we have a lot of information. Again, we can talk and you should go read.
Available in some document, please send link to that, and we can provide our input as well.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. If you look at the OPI repository list, you can see what the coverage is and what's been committed to documentation already. Plus, we have some kind of the early general scope and high-level requirements and mindset. And then we have some documents on what we thought we ought to be releasing, which, again, are going to need revision, and the general way we operate. So you can go read the website. Again, the links are readily available in all the presentations. You can watch. We have a bunch of videos that describe things, And then each of these repositories have README files, sometimes very extensive, on what the shape and scope of that repository's contents is. So there's a lot of information that's been produced on this. Yes, Boris.
Thank you.
From the customer perspective, we have here Gene that is supporting us since the beginning of OPI from Verizon. I think they have a very good perspective that I think, Gene, we didn't hear from you for quite some time. Maybe it's worth, maybe reiterating the needs, your view, position. I think we don't give you enough stage to express Verizon's position here.
No, and thank you for that. Verizon's use cases is really, how do you integrate a DPU, regardless of the vendor, into a private cloud environment when you're using third-party virtualization platforms like Red Hat's OpenStack or OpenShift or Ubuntu, Canonical, etc. We're really looking for a way to seamlessly take and consume features, functions, and services that a DPU offers for our virtualized workloads that we use to run our 4G, 5G infrastructure, without having to have the ISVs that we use develop instances of their codes for specific DPUs. So the ability to, run a workload on a DPU doesn't matter shouldn't matter what DPU is embedded in the platform, but they're still able to take advantage of the services. And for services, that would be transport, storage, security, and management of the infrastructure, very similar to what AWS has done with Nitro. Hope that helps.
It does.
Yeah. What will help even more, Gene, if what we build in, if Verizon can comment on whether it's the right direction. For example, we build all the storage infrastructure. We have all the APIs, all the bridges agnostic to the vendors, with 3 different vendors already up and running. So what will help is maybe perspective. I'm not leading the network work stream, but from the storage perspective, it'd be interesting to hear the feedback, whether it's the right direction. If it is, I think it will give us more positive reinforcement that we are in the right direction, and maybe other companies will jump into more contribution.
I mean, I've always said that I thought with network was the first thing that needed to be tackled, because a lot of the other components that a DPU provide build on top of network. Me personally, I think that any platform like this is a stair-step approach. You have multiple services that you're trying to produce, but you can't really bring them all to market to fruition at once. But my senior leadership, that's what they want to see. They want to see all the functions available so that when they go to install it, they can have that conversation with the ISVs and say, hey, now you're able to take advantage of storage offload, transport offload, security offload, etc. I still, from my use case right now, my biggest pain is transport offload, personally.
Yeah, it's good information. So Stephen, and then Renato, unless Renato's withdrawn his request, but Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, so and maybe this is a question for Gene, maybe a leading question, because I think I already know the answer, and that's, we have some of these, gRPC APIs for storage. I know you just said, network first, but we have these for storage, but is that something that Verizon would consume directly? Or
No,
do you need
it would have to
something
be
else built on top of that before you could consume it?
It would have to be upstreamed into the virtualization environment, OpenStack, Kubernetes, in order for it to come back down as a deliverable service, in Red Hat's OpenStack or OpenShift. That's also an area that I think we need to touch on within the technical steering committee. In my environment, I'm not directly responsible for the entire stack, unlike an AWS or a Microsoft or a Google. I run a private cloud based on OpenStack and Kubernetes, specifically Red Hat OpenStack and Red Hat OpenShift. And then we have workloads from vendors like Ericsson and Nokia, Samsung, et cetera, that come in and run on top of that. In order to make use of DPU and DPU services, that has to be integrated into the virtualization platforms, very much like Monterey and VMware.
Right.
So from storage perspective, to continue the conversation, Jin, from storage perspective, the integration in the either OpenStack or OpenShift, right? For example, for Kubernetes, the storage comes from the CSI storage drivers.
Correct.
So CSI storage drivers are always produced by the storage providers. So let's say you work with Dell EMC storage, just for example. So the Dell EMC will provide the CSI drivers. So the DPUs will be embedded into the CSI drivers. So this is your consumption model, right?
Yes, but it also needs to be supportable by Red Hat, because they're delivering it, as a service, and they provide first level support unless you seek a support exception and then you go around Red Hat directly to the CSI driver vendor.
Mm-hmm.
Also certification of the driver with the platform as well.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and I think that's becoming very clear as to the sort of the initial release direction that we need to define and agree upon, right? So we talked in general about releases and kind of the general approach, but now we need to have a very specific. And as you guys are talking about, code needs to go upstream so it can come back down into various deployments, and there's a whole bunch of knock-ons from that set of code and decisions, and even just API definitions, right? Because even those have a little bit of code that comes with them. So, all right. Any other general comments on this part? Again, we'll dig deeper into this area with the beginning, and I think we should have a beginnings of a proposal for next call.
I just want to comment, Joe, that what Gene is saying is super extra helpful to really focus us. And I wish that TSC will help us to fetch more customers like Gene to hear their perspective so we can really focus ourselves. Makes a lot of sense to hearing that kind of opinions and not generic, like we need offload, but actually how those companies are going to consume OPI and DPUs, the third-party vendors that implement in the code, the consumption models with different virtualization stacks, all of that is super helpful. Otherwise, we are a little bit in the dark. So if we can somehow facilitate more customers to come and speak on any of the meetings, I think it will be extremely helpful.
Yeah, and we can, and KYS from Microsoft will help with that, and others. Rob, go ahead.
Just so the nuance of KYS's question, I'm assuming doesn't get dropped. The cloud service providers have quite different requirements than a Verizon, which has quite different requirements from a high-end high-end enterprise. So we needed diversity, and certainly, I think all of you know I've been trying to pull people in for this.
I want to add to what you said, right? Yeah, there are CSPs like AWS that only, at least in the past, they've only focused on the hyperscale cloud. But Microsoft has presence in both ends of the spectrum. We do have edge properties where we are trying to do similar things, like what OpenShift would do, for instance. Azure Stack is one such offering we have. And then, of course, the cloud scale activities we have, right? So we would like to look at, treat the edge as really edge of the cloud, if you will. And so I have similar programming models, similar bring up and so on. So you're right. Verizon has got an interesting situation where they're actually integrating software coming from Red Hat. And at Microsoft, we think, we should look at the end-to-end solution, not just have pieces that somebody else puts together.
That's right. And that's a good perspective to bring in as well. And there are, one of the interesting things about DPUs is there are multiple classes of customers that cut across a whole bunch of different use cases. Because again, having a microserver with acceleration and tightly coupled packet processing is excellent, but if you're going to try to define common elements of that, API, components, interactions with hosting systems, et cetera, there's so much variety that you can sometimes lose focus. Okay, we'll continue. So this is a good beginning of the conversation we need to continue next time and start to put some concrete proposal together that we then agree to on what goes out the door first. What set of things are we going to try to push upstream? What set of things are we going to publish and say, hey, here is a useful and valuable set of OPI components to define our first release. So put your thinking hats on that topic. And again, I'll try to I'll frame it up better for next time. But it was good to get kind of the intro out today. Any final comment on all that? Okay, last little piece is Sridhar put together these KPIs that get reported monthly, mostly around the GitHub repositories and a few other things like that. There's a spreadsheet where he's cataloged all the things he's pulling and looking at. I asked last time if people could review that and see if there's anything missing or anything they think is completely pointless in terms of the metrics. And so if you haven't done that, please do it. And you can provide, written feedback in Slack or on the mailing list, or just reach out directly to, to me and to Sridhar. But if you haven't looked at the KPI list, go look at it. Let's give some feedback to Sridhar. And if you're happy, it's perfectly okay. You can, the set isn't bad, so you can be happy about it and say, yeah, no, don't need to do anything. And that applies to, that applies to anyone who's contributing, not just the TSC members, the voting members. And then, all right, any final thoughts or questions? Otherwise, I am out of agenda topics for today, but we have the next 2 weeks should be very interesting and let us define things directly.
We have a few minutes, Joe, so if you don't mind.
Do you have a topic? Sure.
Sure. I just want to a little bit for a few minutes continue what we were talking before with Gene and others, right? So I know that team expressed the same concern previously. We need to decide whether we need to change direction from the API perspective here. And I think it's a very important topic, the most important maybe. If we so far we're focusing on gRPC APIs, mostly from the controllers coming from outside world and try to configure all our DPUs and APUs, that is what our focus was so far from the API perspective. If we're talking about third-party companies that want to come and run their applications inside the DPUs and need abstraction layer from all the different SDKs and hardwares of the DPUs, but inside the DPUs, I think what we're doing so far is useless for that use case. So for example, I see a 5 here on the call. If a 5 wants to put containers and applications inside the DPU and abstract DPU SDKs and hardware, gRPC APIs is not a good way to go. We need to switch direction and create a common libraries abstraction on top of SDKs. If Verizon, as Gene is saying, that third parties are coming and doing writing code and application inside the GPUs and APUs, maybe again this brings us in a completely different direction. I really want to have the honest and pure conversation about whether what we're doing is useless and we need to switch direction.
So the gRPC you talk about is simply an XML transport, right? So we could defer that, but the other point you made is really important, I think, which is there are some of us that think that we should offload everything onto this DPU card. All the control plane will run there. And so there's going to be housekeeping workloads running on the DPU so that we can pretty much reserve all of the host capacity for customers.
Yeah, and that's
an important use case for us.
Yeah, perfect. And in fact, if you brought in an outline of what your use case is and why it's important, and why it should be standardized, that would be fantastic. KYS. Rob, you have your hand up.
I like the distinction that Boris made, and I think it actually calls to the front a bunch of, I think, historical miscommunication that's happened. Certainly, all the customers we talk to are much more interested in lower and lower level accesses inside the DPU. And so I think trying to map some of the external gRPC APIs to the use cases that we've had is where we've had a bit of a miscommunication. And I think this is a critical question.
Right, and that is this set of things that we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes is the critical discussion for next to TSC calls.
Just to quickly answer, Rob, the use case from gRPC and external communication came from the second-tier cloud providers. They wanted us to run the controllers from outside DPUs and treat all the DPUs in the same way, configure those. One example is being API proposed by AMD Pensando, for example, right? You can see external controller, and then you configure all of those DPUs from outside. The inside is new for me, but I really hear
I guess I'm not saying it's not a valid use case. I just think they're obviously different, and they force us in different directions.
Absolutely, I agree.
Right, and this
is why I'm bringing this. Yeah.
Well, right, and so this is what we're going to clarify. We're going to agree, and we're going to say, here's what we're doing first. Here's the North Star. Here's what we're doing first. Again, we've done a couple of iterations of this early on, and now that we've actually done a bunch, done some work, and there's been some more soak time. That's what we need to close on. So get thinking, and we'll work on this. We'll put real work into this and come up with something concrete, because that's absolutely essential to several of your guys' points. All right, with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much. And again, get active on Slack and mailing list and individual conversations, and let's get this thing into shape. Thank you.